Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening to the 80s Slasher Librarian. I better return that book I borrowed from them. Their late fees are a killer.
Chapter 10. Free and Sky were led into the camp, prisoners themselves now. They watched the half-dozen male convicts rampaging through the grounds. They broke into every cabin, beginning with Sky's and all the way up the line. Anyar heard the commotion and came out to see what was going on. As she tried to retreat, one of the men dragged her out. Herbert was also dragged out of his cabin by his hair, kicking and screaming. The store was attacked, and the prisoners hauled out in the open bins and pails of food, eating some of what should be cooked uncooked in their haste to party, as Viper yelled over and over. They'd found the cases of wine and had the bottles open and the liquid pouring down their throats, even before Free and Sky and their guards made it to the center of the campgrounds. Linda and Brad had been in the lab, which was invaded quickly. Free heard Linda screaming and didn't want to imagine what was happening to her. Once everyone in the project had been dragged onto the road, Free and Sky were tossed into the ring with the others, surrounded by the men eating, drinking, yelling, shoving, laughing, tearing at the velvet dress Linda wore, touching both Anyar and Herbert in inappropriate places. And Sky. Beautiful Sky was the focus of so much loudish attention. And Free tried to protect her by shoving hands away from her. For his efforts, he was punched in the eye, knocking him on his ass. Finally, a blast filled the air, then another, ear-splitting, and Free looked up to see the one named JJ holding something metallic that had a puff of smoke coming from one end. "Listen up, assholes," he said. Sky crouched next to Free, holding onto him for protection he couldn't provide. "What is that?" she whispered in a trembling voice. It's a gun," Herbert said in his own quivering voice. "A relic from 1,000 years ago." "What does it do?" Sky asked fearfully, "besides deafen you?" It kills people with metal bits." "We're free," JJ said, and made the long metal weapon fire again, shooting something into the air. The sound caused Sky to put her hands over her ears, and when she took them away, her ears rang. The male and female prisoners yelled and screamed and jumped into the air. Some of the men, including Viper, kicked over anything nearby and threw things around. Free and his team members cowered and quivered. None of them in all their young lives had encountered anything so base and crude as what was happening to them now. "We're free, and I'm still your leader," JJ announced, firing that damned weapon yet again. All of the convicts cheered, although Free noticed that Viper didn't cheer quite as loudly, nor did the woman named Blister. He saw them glance at one another. "That means I make the rules," JJ said. "Yeah, you done good by us so far," one of the men yelled, and the others shouted approval. "Right now we got ourselves some hostages." More screaming, throwing of things, and the weapon firing again. "We got a chip to play to get us off this fucking dead moon and back into the land of the living." While they cheered him on, Sky said to Free, "We've got to escape. They'll kill us." "I know," he whispered. "Let's make a run for it," Linda said from behind them. "No," Sky said. "They'll just capture us and—" But it was too late. Linda, in a panic, tried to run from the circle. One of the men grabbed her and began ripping off her clothes while she screamed at the top of her lungs. Brad jumped up to help her and instantly was beaten up by two men until he lay on the ground not moving. "Hold it! Hold it!" JJ shouted. "I want them alive and well and living in hell, but not yet. I need to question all of them first. You'll get your chance with the ladies," he leered, "and the men." And the prisoners grinned and laughed and punched each other, and Free felt his fear escalate. JJ motioned to Amanda, who quickly joined him. "Get them into that big cabin," he told her, "and you and Blister keep watch of them." She nodded and came to the 6 hostages from one side, while Blister approached from the other. "Stand up," she ordered, and they did, but for Brad, who was barely propping himself up with his elbows. Blister kicked Brad in the side with the metallic-toed boot, and Brad groaned. "Gee, that'll stand him up," Sky said. "Watch your mouth, bitch," Blister said, and raised her hand to punch Sky. "You two, get him up," Amanda said, catching Blister's fist. Sky and Free reached down to help Brad stand. "Get moving," Blister ordered. She picked up a metal rod on the ground and slapped it against her palm in a threatening gesture, swatting Herbert on the ass, making him yell and trot along ahead of the others. En route, they picked up a sobbing, half-naked Linda. Anyar helped her on one side, Herbert reluctantly on the other, when Blister snapped the rod in the air and said, "Get her up! We ain't got all day." As they left for the cabin that had belonged to Linda and Brad, Free heard JJ say, "I want everything in these cabins brought out here and dumped into the middle so we can see what's what. Viper, take Jake and go into the store and see what's all in there. We're going to need provisions, and we don't know for how long. And find their comm system. I want to know how they're in contact with Earth 2. I'm heading into the lab to see what these guys have been up to." JJ entered the building that was the laboratory, a building he was somewhat familiar with. A building on this very spot used to function in another capacity, a kind of office where camp instructors would come to chill out. The exterior of the building looked different, although it was a similar size. The interior was filled with the latest tech equipment. He moved from console to console, letting his mind flash back a couple of decades, wondering if he would be able to use any of this stuff. What a place this camp had been. There was nothing like it in the galaxy. He and Amanda had come here, run things in a way that made sense to them. As far as he could reason, they had saved the damn universe. And what thanks did they receive for it? A very royal thanks, up the ass. As if things weren't bad enough in the past, the idiots in charge were trying it again. Maybe, maybe not. He wasn't sure what they were here to do, but he'd find out pretty damn quick. He entered the glassed-in room and went to the bank of buttons and knobs. Not much of it made sense to him. He noticed the pause button was lit, so he pressed it to see what they had been doing. Just behind him, a holographic image lit up and spun on a round platform. An image that looked remarkably and frighteningly familiar. Jason. "What the fuck?" he muttered. "They can't be bringing him back." Just then, Viper came through the lab door. He saw the image but didn't know what or who it was. "Can't find no comm system, no link-ups neither. Checked all the cabins, the store, couple of the other buildings." Viper looked around. "Don't seem to be nothing here neither." "We'll find it," JJ said, turning his back on the virtual image as if that would make it vanish from his mind. "They've got to have a way to communicate with Earth 2. I say we kick it out of those punks. Why are we keeping them around anyways? We only need one to exchange." "We don't know what we need yet. What if the government wants 1 for 1? Then we don't got enough anyway. There's 9 of us here and 6 of them." JJ shook his head. "Yeah, and then we negotiate. Easier to go from 6 for 9 than 1 for 9. Viper reluctantly saw the logic of it, but he didn't like it, and JJ knew that. Viper was one of those guys you could trust only so far. He'd always back JJ up, but he didn't always want to. They'd gotten into a few little tiffs here and there over the years, and so far JJ had always pounded the shit out of him, and once cut him bad. If he hadn't have done that, Viper would have stuck him in the heart, and he'd be gone. Viper was in his 30s, and JJ was 42. JJ was getting tired of being tough, tired of having to be king of the shit heap. It hadn't come naturally to him. He'd had to learn damn fast, and it couldn't last forever. One day, Viper would get the best of him, and he knew that. But so far, most of the other guys didn't want to follow Viper. He was mean, cruel, and reactive. He couldn't think things through, and that meant he would go down the wrong path fast. Most of the guys understood that, but not all. Every leader and potential leader had his followers. "Come on, We'll head outside, JJ said, clasping Viper on the shoulder, partly as a friendly gesture, partly to show who was boss. Being outdoors, even in this shitty environment, will do us good. Been a long time. You got that right, Viper said, grinning. Let's see what the guys have found. Maybe there's something useful. They found the others in the road, running around a bonfire they'd built, throwing furniture and papers and everything they could gather in two hands onto it. Jesus, JJ muttered under his breath. What idiots, he thought. Hold it, guys. Let me see stuff before it gets blazed. We might need it. It's just papers and shit, JJ. All of it, said Odin, a big lug of a guy that had the physical power of 3 men and the brain of a child. At least he was loyal to JJ. You're probably right, but maybe there's something we could use. We wouldn't want to burn the comm system by accident, which made all the men pause. Get out of here, you morons, Viper yelled, pushing men away from the blaze, some of whom pushed back. What you got, Sam? JJ asked a man of medium height and medium build. Sam had been a model prisoner over the years, and had somehow survived the chaos without going insane, and accumulating only a handful of scars on his body. It was all relative, of course, his sanity. In actual fact, Sam was a sociopath, and had no feelings for anyone or anything. Sam held a tin box. Got a bunch of cubes in here. I guess they're hollows. Want to see one? If I can figure out how to get it work? Maybe it needs a machine to run it. He picked up one of the cubes and looked it over from all sides. Hold on. There's a button here. He pressed it and an image appeared with the flames as a background. Hey, what do you know? Somebody shouted. They're like the old ones from when I was a kid. JJ was astonished to see Author J. Castillo floating in the air. His mouth dropped open when he heard Castillo say, We will, of course, with Jason, have the most advanced soldier ever created. He will be virtually indestructible. While Castillo ranted on, JJ felt his fury build. So they were trying to replicate Castillo's experiments. He watched the cube for only a few more seconds before yelling, Shut that goddamn thing off! When the cube stopped, he spun on his heels and said to Viper, Look for comm equipment. I'll be back. He stalked his way to the cabin where Amanda and Blister kept guard over the hostages. When he stormed in, the 6 kids looked up at him as one unit, 12 frightened eyes. There's a bonfire, Blister, he said to the pyromaniac. She constantly rubbed the tips of her fingers, which were always blistered from setting fires, hence the name. I think Viper could use your help. Sure, she said, almost flying out the door. What's up? The woman named Amanda said. She looked at JJ with concern, clearly aware of his anger. Who's in charge of this little group? He asked the 6. Free raised his hand. That would be me. In 2 long strides, JJ was on him, grabbing him by the throat, lifting him to his feet, off his feet even, while the others yelled and screamed to let him go. So, you're here to do Castillo's work after all? No, Free gasped, feeling terrified, trying to pry the fingers away from his larynx so he could breathe, fearing he was about to have his lights punched out. Don't bullshit me! I'm not. We're here to build a cyborg. Yeah, I know. One by the name of Jason. What are you talking about? Brad jumped to his feet. Down, JJ ordered, pointing, and the bruised and battered Brad fell to his knees like a puppy with a bashed-in nose. JJ, they're just kids, Amanda said. Mandy, I saw Castillo at least a holographic image of him. They've got all his notes on cubes, and I saw the image of Jason in the lab. That's just a stock image, Anyar said. We were working with the computer's basic form, trying to build something that could house the large number of programs we want to insert. Yeah, and let me guess. Some of those programs have to do with the ability to kill. Not at all, Linda said, starting to her feet, holding the top of her torn dress against her chest. But instantly she saw the look in JJ's eyes and stayed seated. We're putting together a cyborg that can replicate human thinking, feeling, and reactions. It's got nothing to do with the military. Yeah, and who's financing this? The Mansfield guy you mentioned? He stared hard at Free, who was now back on his feet. The fingers around his throat had loosened, but not by much. It took all the courage Free had to answer. Yes, he's the one, and his aims are not destructive. He's an honest businessman and a philanthropist, and a humanitarian. Look, you've got the wrong idea. We know about Castillo, but we're not replicating what he did. Then where'd you get the cubes? They're mine, Sky admitted. I brought them along when we came here last week. The others didn't know about them until yesterday when Free found out I had them and we watched them together. That's where you were? Anyar said. You had the notes? Linda added. Sky ignored them. Look, we were hired for a simple cyborg project, to replicate life, not to create the ultimate soldier. We don't want to create anything like we saw at the military complex. We just want to learn how to... Hold on! Amanda's hand went up like a stop sign, and her tone changed completely to that of somebody who was filled with fear. Like what you saw at the military complex? Sky paused and Free took over. We went to the military complex because Linda here, he nodded at her, saw something when she and Brad went over there for a picnic the other day. It scared her. When Sky and I watched the cubes, we realized that what Linda saw may have been this Jason that Castillo had resurrected. So we went there. We were on our way back when you found us. And, JJ said, his face a mask of repressed violence. And we saw something. We think it was Jason. Amanda said angrily. Jason was destroyed. Maybe there was a copy, a backup, Free argued. Maybe that's what we saw. The backup isn't there, Amanda said. What? Free said. So there was a backup? But we saw something. It had to be Jason. He's huge, right? With a metal mask for a face, red glowing eyes burning like the fires of hell, and this long knife or some... It's a machete, Amanda said. How did you get the cubes? JJ turned to Sky. She didn't want it known, didn't want to say it, but she didn't know how she could avoid it now. I got them from my mother. My father sent them to her before he died. You're his kid? Amanda said in a stunned voice. The bastard had a wife and a kid? 3 kids, and I'm the only surviving child. Jesus. Just then, Viper came through the door. We can't find no comm systems that goes off a moon complex, he said. Then to Free, who was the only one standing, he demanded. Where is it, fucker? There's no communication system, Free said. That was decided before the project began. It would have been too expensive to have a comm system here because of the gases. So we opted not to have one so we could get some better computer equipment instead. What are you talking about? Amanda snapped. We had a communication system here 20 years ago. We didn't have any trouble with gases then. Free just stared at her, then at the others in the room, feeling confused. I don't know. I'm just telling you what Jackson told me. The gases preclude easy communication. We're alone here. What exactly did Jason tell you, Free? Sky asked. Free tried to remember clearly. He said we couldn't contact Earth 2, that we should use the AI. Couldn't or shouldn't? I'm not sure. Free thought for a moment, then his brain suddenly cleared. It just occurs to me now that Jackson was trying to place us here to be self-sufficient. It may be that communication is possible, but he wanted us to try to go it alone and see how we fared. I mean, this is a first job for pretty much, well, all of us. Our first time away from home. What if you had an emergency? Amanda asked. Jackson said that any time we needed to send a message to Earth 2, we should use Major Tom. What? Amanda screamed. He's fucking still around? That demon? Free, Sky, and the others shrank back, staring at one another in confusion. Finally, Free said, "He's our AI. We rely on him for life support, supplies, and to send messages to and from Earth 2. He's not the original Major Tom. He's a copy that's been reprogrammed by Jackson Mansfield. His bad chips have been removed. We haven't had any trouble with him." "Call him," JJ said. "Major Tom?" Free said. No answer. "MT, where are you?" Nothing. Free turned to the others in the project. "Have you guys been in touch with the AI in the last day?" "Not since you and Sky left the camp," Brad said. "We didn't need him for anything. We couldn't reach him at the military complex, but thought we were out of range. Or the earthquake had him busy repairing the dome or something." "What earthquake?" Viper said. "There was no fucking earthquake. That is such shit. Let me get the truth out of them." He started toward Free, fist raised. JJ blocked him with a muscled arm. Viper, behind the barricaded flesh, glared at Free. "Why do you think there's been an earthquake?" Amanda asked. It was Sky who answered. "Because when we were at the military complex looking to see if it was really Jason that Linda saw, down at the lowest level, level 9, the ground rumbled and then the earth started falling in on us, and we could hardly get up the ramp. Every floor below ground was completely filled with earth. We just assumed it was a seismic disturbance." Amanda nodded a bit. "That wasn't the ground. It was from the sky." Free put it together. "The sling. It malfunctioned. We thought that it was a quake and that the elevator plunged back into the military complex. The sling took the next load of prisoners up, and then the elevator moved back down in the complex for the next group when the sling started moving. It pulled away, then bashed the dome again and stalled. Everybody up there stuck," Amanda explained. "Hopefully no one's hurt," Linda said. "Like you give a fuck," Blister snarled, coming in the door. "Hey, they got the fire going real good and hot and high." "Burn your butt, baby," Viper said, pinching her arm. She pulled away, saying, "Ouch!" "We were still in the prison, but the cell doors were open because we were being loaded. We made it out," Amanda said to Anyar. "The rest are coming." Free felt despair settle over him. The rest? These guys were barely human, and now there would be more? Herbert asked the question he wanted to ask. How many more?" "Enough to rip your insides out with their cocks," Viper said. "There's probably 100 or more of us who didn't get in the sling," Amanda said. "Why the fuck you telling them anything?" Blister snapped. "You two outside," Amanda said. Viper laughed at her. Blister yelled, "When the fuck did you become leader?" Amanda looked at JJ, who, for all intents and purposes, didn't return her look. But he did say, "Viper, get a barrier built around the camp. Fire if you have to. And we're going to need some weapons. See what you can find. I don't think there'll be much, but maybe we can build some stuff. When the rest of them get here, there'll be some power plates. Which one of you works the bio builder?" "Bio builder?" Anyar said. "You mean the biolab equipment that can build actual forms?"
"Yeah."
"Me and Herbert."
"Okay, Viper, take that guy with you."
"Yeah," Viper said, licking his thin lips and rubbing his hands together in anticipation. "No!" Herbert screamed, digging his heels into the floor, clinging to Anyar into a chair. Suddenly he wet his pants and began to cry. "I'll go," Anyar volunteered. "I know the equipment better than him anyway." "Sure, pretty pussy, come along," Viper said, licking those lips even more. Blister scowled at him, then at the girl. "She's ugly, you blind?" Blister said to Viper. "I'm blind," Anyar said. "Very funny." "But I can see the equipment, and I'm good at working it. I'll help you build what you need." "Come on," Viper said, grabbing her by the arm, shoving her in front of him, slapping her on the ass with his other hand and laughing. "Shit," Blister said, shaking her head, but followed them out. JJ turned to Free and the others. "All of you sit. We've got some talking to do." Once Freed explained more of what their project was about in detail and who Jackson Mansfield was and what they knew about the sling and the prison colony to be formed on Thanos and everything they understood about Jason, Amanda said, "JJ, I think we should tell them about us." He nodded and Amanda started. "JJ and me, we were here 20 years ago when this place was a camp. We were counselors. Can you believe it? Castillo was in charge in the military complex, where he was conducting experiments. He was building a new and improved Jason out of his remaining DNA to be run by the original AI called Major Tom. But you know all that. What you don't know is that everybody on Moon Complex was killed, including Castillo. Everybody but us." Sky wanted to know everything, but she wanted to see if they were making this up as they went along. "Who killed Jason?" Sky asked. "Castillo? He said on a cube he was going to do that." Amanda looked at her blankly. "It was the other way around. Jason did him in, stabbed him in his techno-eye with 3 pieces of glass from a mirror." Sky gasped, and Free slipped an arm around her shoulders, wanting to comfort her. But Sky was horrified for another reason. That image of how Castillo had died had repeatedly appeared in her dreams. Only it was she who was stabbed in the eye with 3 sharp objects. Her stomach rolled. Despite feeling nauseous, Sky also felt merciless with herself, with everyone. The truth had to be known. "You said Jason was killed. Do you know who did it?" Amanda paused. "We thought we did." "Look," JJ said, "here's what happened. Castillo created a virtual Jason, and at the same time managed to get his hands on the real Jason, or what was left of him. He was bitmapping the virtual Jason from the DNA of the original Jason and from everything he could use, feeding the thing with the few victims he had stored in his lab. The rich camp girls." "Oh no," Sky said, her hand over her mouth, and Free pulled her close. "Things got out of control real fast. Castillo was killed by Jason, and so was just about everybody else on the Moon Complex. Mandy and me tried to get help from a ship, but in the end it was up to us, and we managed to use Castillo's equipment to ship the physical Jason and just about all the Madman's equipment out into space, into a black hole. If all the calculations were right. And that's where he is, or was." "But you guys saw him at the complex. JJ, what do you think?" Amanda asked, her voice filled with terror. "I think this is fucked. I know we got rid of him. Castillo likely made a copy." "He intended to make a copy." Everyone looked at Sky. It was in one of the cubes," JJ said. "As far as we know, if there was a copy, it must have been strictly virtual and in a rudimentary form. And it should have been eliminated when the prison was opened because the entire military complex was cleaned out by the military, and they supposedly reprogrammed the AI to run the prison." "Which is what Major Tom told us," Linda said. "He was a copy from the reprogrammed AI, and then Jackson came here and added some further programs." "Then what's at the military complex now?" "I'm betting either the original Major Tom or your AI had something to do with that," JJ said. "I'm thinking that too," Free said. "Our Major Tom is a copy of the original Major Tom, with all the bad programming supposedly eliminated, the corrupted chips removed. It couldn't have been him. And our AI told us that the original Major Tom still exists and is in charge of the military complex. That is its only function." "Then there are 2 Major Toms," Amanda said. "Okay, this is getting batshit crazy," JJ said. "So where's your AI now?" "I wish I knew," Free said glumly. "If you guys were like camp counselors, why were you put in jail?" Linda wanted to know. "I mean, if you got rid of this killer, isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't you have been rewarded?" "The military didn't see it that way," Amanda said. "Jason was their baby, and even if the baby was a demon, it was their demon. We knew too much about what went on here, about Castillo, and about all the deaths. We were dangerous, so they tossed us into prison, on a basically uninhabitable moon where nobody would ever find us. We've been rotting away for 20 years, growing gray and tired and bitter. Now suddenly they want to send us to an even worse place? What's that about? Are you the only ones here from the original camp? Free asked. Yeah, just the two of us. All the other cons came within a year of us being incarcerated. You were wrongly imprisoned? Free said, suddenly getting into it. JJ just nodded, and Amanda looked distressed. You killed the physical Jason, or at least got rid of him, and got rid of Castillo's equipment. You did the universe a good turn. But here you are in jail, Free said. Tell us about it. The other guys, Amanda continued, they don't know the whole of it. They know we killed somebody, but not who or why. We never told them. Figured it was better to keep a lid on it, just in case there were spies. There are always spies. We didn't want any information about Jason to get out. We didn't want to risk that somebody else would pay the price if the military found out. Or worse, that somebody else would try to recreate him. Hell, we thought that by sending Castillo's equipment and notes into the black hole with the physical Jason, that we got rid of everything. Yeah, the virtual Jason still existed, controlled by Major Tom, but it was ineffective without the body. And besides, the AI was reprogrammed, or so we were told. You probably did get rid of everything, Sky said. There were only the cubes and a handful of notes to my mother, which said almost nothing about Castillo's work. She didn't mention the missing cube, the one that talked about Free's past. They were in a bad enough situation with the convicts knowing that Castillo was her father. If they knew that Free was the son of Jason, Amanda then said to Free, Look, are you sure this guy Mansfield didn't have a master plan to replicate Castillo's project? Are you sure he wasn't interested in creating another Jason? I don't see how, Free said. I hired everybody here, and it's just a fluke that I selected Sky. Jackson didn't have anything to do with it. Both Sky and I tried to do research on the history of the moon complex, and there was nothing available. And we're both very good at researching. I found one small reference to Castillo, and it was innocuous, and Sky found a paragraph. It's like he and this project were erased, as if he and Jason had never existed. Still, maybe this Jackson got a hold of information you couldn't get. I've known him all my life, Free said. He raised me, helped my mother. I saw all his business dealings. He's a fair and honest man, and his work involves helping humanity, not hurting it. He only bought Elysium because it was cheap and a good place to do research. The government of Earth 2 wanted to get rid of it and offered it to him. Nobody was interested in Elysium because of the catastrophe that happened here, which nobody really knew anything about anyway because there was no information available. Look, Brad said, we've never completely trusted the AI, at least Linda and me. And me, Herbert said in a frightened voice. I'm thinking it knows what happened here 20 years ago. Who did what to whom? It knew every in and out of Castillo's work. Amanda said, the original AI ran the resurrected Jason. What you saw could have been a virtual Jason. No, Linda snapped. It was real. Flesh and blood. I'm not sure, Sky said, but the Jason Free and I saw looked pretty real too. Okay, Brad said. How about this? The original Major Tom had control of the virtual Jason. Maybe he built a body to store it in. The one Linda saw and you guys. That's why it's in the prison. The original AI is trapped there, so the virtual Jason now embodied is trapped there as well. And you think that our Major Tom, because it's a copy of the original, knew about it? Free asked. It's hard to say, Sky said. We don't know what he did or didn't know, and now he's not around, which is pretty creepy when you think about it. Wow, Linda said. The original AI made a body for the virtual Jason all by itself? Without direction? That's amazing. Probably some crucial instructions were left in the original AI's programming, Brad said. Or just maybe, even as it was being reprogrammed, it rebuilt its original chips. Holy shit, Linda said. It's designed to repair itself. It's replicated the parts that were removed or reprogrammed. Then why didn't it take over the entire moon complex? Free wondered. Why was Jason imprisoned in the military complex? Maybe because the original AI didn't need to move him out, or couldn't, Sky said. And just maybe, JJ said, this Jason was scheduled to end up on Thanos too. I still don't get how the AI made a body on its own, Linda said. Nobody had an answer for that. Finally, she sighed. Well, what does it matter now, anyway? The sling is broken, so nobody is leaving here on it. And the below-ground floors of the complex are buried. So the virtual embodied Jason is buried. Jason, too, is dead. I doubt it, JJ said. Why? Because it took a hell of a lot to get rid of the first one Castillo built. And I'm pretty damn sure it'll take a hell of a lot more to kill the second one. Because knowing the original Major Tom as I do, or did, he'd have learned from his mistakes and made this Jason a lot stronger. I'm betting that what's under the military complex is even more powerful than the first one. Nope, we haven't seen the last of him. I bet you my bottom dollar he's down there. God, Free said. He could barely incorporate everything he was hearing. If all this was true, they were in grave danger. And not just from the other prisoners. The main threat was Jason himself. We've got to get off this moon, he said. Great idea, Amanda said. Any ideas how we can do that? Maybe we can repair the sling and end up on the prison colony. That is the sling's destination, where there are no guards, just prisoners. Nobody to hear you screaming, and risk Jason ending up there too. We can reprogram the sling, change its course, Free announced. Kid, are you out of your gourd? From what I saw, that sling must have been built by a team of technical geniuses. By the time you figured out its components and software, we'd all be dead. Our grandchildren will be dead, JJ said loudly. There has to be some way off this moon, Amanda said. How are you all to get off when your project was over? There's a shuttle scheduled to pick us up in 6 months. Great. Nobody will be alive by then, JJ said. In case of an emergency, we were to send a message through Major Tom, and then Jackson would send a shuttle, Free said. Wonderful, Linda said. And now the stupid AI won't answer us. Why? Because it's in league with the original one. Or maybe it is the original AI for all we know. Look, okay, Free said in a determined voice. There are the other prisoners that are coming. And there's Jason. JJ, you've commanded these guys for a while, it looks like. And you killed Jason before. Or at least gotten rid of him. We can survive this. JJ looked Free square in the eye for a long time. Too long. His irises down agates that spoke of something so fixed in the universe that it became impossible to keep staring. And yet Free couldn't do anything else. Those eyes made Free nervous beyond what he thought made any sense. Abruptly, the convict leader stood up. Let's go, he said to Amanda, who turned with him and headed out the door. Are we still under guard? Linda asked tentatively. JJ glanced back at her. What's the point? You'll be dead soon. We'll all be dead. You might as well enjoy yourselves before Jason gets here. Chapter 11. Blister had been eavesdropping at the window while that asshole JJ and that bitch Amanda talked with the camp babies. She knew Viper would want to hear all about it. Just as they were finishing up and before anyone could get a glimpse of her, she bolted over to the lab. What she found there did not please her at all. Viper had his hands all over that blind girl while she worked at a bunch of controls in the biolab. "Hey!" she called as she opened the transparent door, just to let him know she was coming. Viper pulled back only a bit and stretched an arm, motioning with his fingers. "Babe, come here. We go 3 ways." Blister forced a smile. "Yeah, sure, but I got something to tell you that'll make you excited more than that pussy ever could." He turned away from her to run his tongue up Anyar's neck. The blind girl ignored him as if she felt nothing, as if he didn't exist. Blister knew that nothing made him hotter than being ignored. He slid a hand far down inside the back of her pants while she worked, pressing his hard self up against her ass. Still, she kept working. Blister couldn't stand it. "Viper, this is serious!" He turned and hissed at her, which is how he got the nickname. That sound she used to find so sexy, and still did when it wasn't turned on her. That sound plus the one massive snake tattoo that slithered up and around his body, starting at the big toe of his left foot, up to the top of the foot and around the ankle, up the back of his leg and spiraling around to his butthole, then up his spinal column to the back of his neck, further onto his scalp. "Can't you see I'm fucking busy, bitch? Fuck off!" "Yeah, you're busy fucking a blind girl while this whole thing is falling around your stupid ears." He jumped away from Anyar and got to Blister in 2 strides, which was quite a feat for such a short guy. His energy always amazed her. Blister, though frightened of his violence, which she'd been the recipient of before, stood her ground. "What'd you call me?" he snarled in her face, his breath hot and stinking of onions, his hands balled into fists at his sides. She forced herself to talk calmly. "I'm just saying that things are going down you need to know about. Big things. Things that'll let you be the boss instead of dickhead." "What things?" she whispered. "Not in front of her." "She's nothing," he snapped. "Trust me," Blister said. She jerked her head and he followed her out of the glass room. As she closed the glass door behind them, he said, "This better be good or you're looking for a whooping." Quickly, she explained everything she'd heard as best as she could understand it. The bottom line, she told him, was that there's a guy JJ's scared shitless of who can help you. "I don't need no fucking help," Blister sighed. "I don't mean help. I mean help." He stared at Viper, giving him a quirky nod. He scratched his scalp, still not getting it. "You're telling me there's some kind of super soldier up there at the military complex?" "Yeah, JJ knows about him, and Amanda. They seen him, or one like him, 20 years ago, and he wiped out everybody on Moon Complex but them." "And what's this got to do with me?" "With us, Viper, with us," she said, pressing her body into his. He grabbed her arm so hard she felt a bruise forming, and then jerked her head back. "You interrupted my shit. For this shit? Why, I oughta..." "That Jason, we can use him to fight for us," she said. "You could command him to do what you want, and he could take out JJ and some of the others, and you'd be the boss." That stopped him. A dozen possibilities flashed in his eyes like laser images at the speed of light. "Yeah, you got a point." Then he looked worried for a moment. "If this Jason guy is as tough as they say he is, while he'll listen to me. He'll want to be boss himself." "No, he won't, 'cause he ain't human, or not enough of 'em or something, and that's why he'll listen to you. He's like a computer shaped like a guy. You're good with machines. You can figure out how to control him, and then this place'll be yours." Blister watched Viper, thinking some more. "So where is he?" "They said he's in the basement of the military complex, 9 floors down from the ground. We just got to get in there and get him." "Okay, so we'll do it later. There's no rush." "There is, Viper," she said, sensing she was losing him to thrills that of the flesh that beckoned. "If we don't get him now, JJ will. You gotta go now while you got the edge and a chance of having some guys on your side. If you wait, it'll be too late. And don't forget the other guys from the prison will be here as soon as they can claw their way out of that military complex." Viper thought about all this some more. Maybe the bitch was right. Maybe he should go now. He glanced into the glass room at the little blind chick with the fleshy butt and thought about how nice it would be to slip it in her. "You gotta go now," Blister was saying. All right. Get off my dick." "Let's go find Frank. He always liked you. He'd side with you against J.J., Sam, and Odin." "Yeah, Frank's okay." "Let's go talk to him now. Come on, Viper. Here's your chance to be leader." They left the lab together and saw J.J. and Amanda at the bonfire. The babies must still be in the cabin, unguarded. Viper sneered, just like J.J., giving them the chance to get away. Blister looked at the flames longingly. God, she wanted to get close to that red-yellow flicker. She felt like peeling off her clothes and standing buck naked, getting herself hot all over, spinning like meat roasting on a spit. So close that the hairs on her navel would singe as the flames licked her body like a hot hand. Just touching it a few minutes ago, it made bubbles on the fingertips of her right hand. She wanted that fire near her. But there was no time. She had Viper interested, and she had to get him moving. He had to be top dog in this pack of curs, so she could be top bitch, and give it to that bitch Amanda and any of the other bitches that thought they were so hot. And Viper'd be so grateful for her for getting him to be king, he'd fuck her whenever she wanted it, and give her everything she ever wanted, and not be mean to her, and he wouldn't belt her around no more. She knew he only hit her because he was frustrated at having to bend over for JJ, who was just a punk, but had somehow gotten control of the whole prison. Well, that would change, and soon. Viper had a word with Frank, who was tossing papers into the fire. Then he gave Blister the palm in her direction signal to remain at the camp. He and Frank walked off together, casual-like, between two of the cabins. JJ noticed, but it looked like he didn't think it mattered, or maybe he just didn't care. Blister really wanted to go with them, but she also wanted to stare at the fire. What to do? There'd be other fires, she guessed. She'd better go and make sure they did this right. A lot was riding on it. When she knew that JJ and Amanda and the others were not watching, she ran behind one of the cabins and followed Viper and Frank at a distance. She had to make sure he did this, but she didn't want him knowing she was following or there'd be hell to pay. Once they got Jason on their side, things would be damn near perfect around here. As Viper and Frank reached the path to the military complex, they ran into Crowley and his badass gang. "Hey, asshole! Or you still got one!" "Ha ha!" Crowley called, and the 9 guys with him laughed. Viper and Crowley had been rivals inside, twin dog number 2s, and this wasn't a good place to meet. Just Viper and Frank against 10 of them. Viper wanted to shove it to him, but that wasn't going to work out right now. Not if he wanted to come out of this with the jaw intact and no knife wound in his chest. He had an idea. Viper laughed, turning Crowley's challenge into a joke. "Listen, Crowley, I got a proposition for you," he said, smiling what he hoped was an ingratiating grin, although he wanted to cream the bastard. "Hey guys, hear that? The fucker propositioned me. I should beat the shit out of you for that," Crowley threatened. "Don't lose your cool, Crowley. I got a big gig on the roll here, and I'm offering you a piece." "Offering me a piece?" Crowley laughed. "Your ass are blisters. Now she's a piece of ass." The other guys laughed, and Frank whispered, "Stay chilled, Viper. We got business interest here." Viper was barely restraining himself. He gave it a quick thought, then grinned. "Yeah, she's an okay piece. Likes it every which way. Boring, though. I've had it with her, so she's up for grabs." Blister, watching from the bushes, was royally pissed off. Maybe he was just saying that to save his own ass, but she resented being taken for granted. "So what's the gig?" one of Crowley's guys asked, a sneer on his face, like Viper wouldn't know a good score if he tripped on one. Viper pulled himself up to his full height of hard muscle, as short as that actually was. "I'm about to take over." "Over JJ's dead body," somebody laughed. "Yeah, probably." "You and Frank and your twat gonna make that happen?" another of Crowley's dudes wanted to know, and they all laughed. Me, Frank, and Jason. Who the hell is Jason? Crowley asked, and Viper explained it to him. Just the biggest badass motherfucking killing machine that exists, that's all. He was designed to take out anybody and everybody, got the strength of 10 goddamn men, and he don't give a goddamn about nothing. Even JJ's scared shitless of him. If he's such a bad mofo, Crowley said, curled fist on his hips, what's to say he won't take you out? 'Cause I got a heads up on how to control him, Viper said. It wasn't true, but he had to convince them somehow. He knew he'd need help getting rid of JJ. He told them a few more things that Blister had told him and ended with, so we get this guy out of the basement, program him to do what we tell him, and the first thing we tell him is to terminate JJ. You in for 50%, Crowley? Your boys, my boys, we share the rule. Crowley thought about it for barely a second. Sure, I'm game for half. Viper knew this was total bullshit on Crowley's part. The dumbass probably figured that once they found Jason, Crowley would start by having him take out Viper. Or maybe Crowley and his boys would do that. But Viper had his own plans, and they involved getting rid of Crowley at just about the same time he got rid of JJ. Then let's hit it, Viper said good-naturedly, waving them to follow as he started up the path. They continued toward the military complex, meeting more of the cons en route, until they had a party of close to 40 men. Once they arrived at the complex, Viper saw that what Blister had said was true. The ground had caved in around the structure, and the floors beneath the ground floor were buried. When Viper had fled from the military complex earlier, he had no idea that there were floors below ground. Viper had figured that the ground floor was it. The piles of dirt around it a mess because nobody took care of anything but the prison. The freed convicts saw that the dirt looked weird, kind of newly filled in, but Frank or somebody figured it was from the sling whenever it hit the biosphere. Now that they knew about the cave-in, the look of the ground surrounding the military complex made sense. Total sense. Okay, we shovel, Viper said. You guys go in there and get whatever you can that'll work to clear out this dirt. Why don't we pull this Jason guy out from the inside instead of trying to dig him up from the outside? Someone asked from behind Viper. 'Cause who knows how to get down there from inside? Anybody here know? When we broke out, the elevator only went to the ground. Any of you guys see anything different? He asked Crowley's men specifically. A few heads shook, and Viper heard a couple no's and nopes and uh-uhs. Then Crowley said, Yeah, well, there must be a way down from inside, even if we didn't see it. Viper sighed. Remember that time Andy and Osler was sent down to get a prisoner when the elevator took the wrong direction? They got down to ground from the top, hit metal, and discovered there was no way down from there? Well, why would it be different now? Crowley thought about that for a minute. They had all gotten down to ground level from the elevator, but it didn't seem to go any further. Maybe when the damn sling hit it, it broke through the building, Crowley said, as if Viper was brain dead. Viper figured it was Crowley who had a few missing brain cells. Okay, we'll send a couple guys in to see if there's a way down through the inside, Viper said. The rest of us will dig here. Between all of us, we'll find him. I'll go in, Frank volunteered. Me too. I got a bad back. I'll go too, said Pratt, one of Crowley's men with a pockmarked face. Okay, Viper told them. You two find a way down, you go get him, and you bring him back out, here with you fast and in one piece. Got it? And if you run into any other guys, send them out here with buckets and shovels or whatever the fuck else they can find to help us goddamn dig. Several of the men were already returning with pails and scoops they'd found, and 2 guys had shovels. They started in right away, Viper directing them to the side of the military complex, where the windows lined up from the top floor to the main floor. He figured the below-ground floors followed suit. Jason had been seen in a window once before. He thought it might be easier to find him that way now. Frank and Pratt headed past the others who were searching for tools and went right to the main elevator, which stood open. They stepped inside. Might go down from here, but you probably need a key or a code or something, Pratt said, pointing at the slot for a key card and the print scan beside it. You any good at hot wiring? Nope, Frank told him. Let's look for some stairs. There's gotta be stairs. Pratt kicked the back wall of the elevator as if to punish it for not accommodating them. They wandered around the massive ground floor, although it was not nearly as large as the top floor, which held the prison. Against a far wall they found a door, almost invisible. It was so flush with the wall, and up close they could see that the door was not meant to be conspicuous. The door did have a knob, but it was locked, and a panel waiting for a code or print was placed near it on the wall. Now what the fuck do we do? Pratt said. Frank looked at the panel for a moment and then said, Fuck it. Out of the piles of debris littering the ground floor that had fallen when the sling hit, he grabbed a metal bar that had broken from the ceiling and used it as a crowbar. Quickly, he broke through the wall to find metal behind it, and used the bar to pull the door away from the wall. The door opened after a few pulls of the crowbar, revealing a way down the complex. Inside, the stairwell was completely dark. Could use a light, Pratt said. He glanced around the room, not finding anything of use. Yeah, well, there ain't any I can see, Frank said, unless you've got one up your sleeve. They headed into the darkness. Frank spread his arms and felt the walls with both hands, which told him that the stairwell wasn't that wide. They moved slowly down into the black mouth, going forever. There seemed to be a good 100 steps down to the next level, maybe more, and Frank was wondering about what they were doing, heading down to find some super soldier in the dark, when suddenly Pratt said, Man, it's like we're going to ice hell, and only then did Frank realize just how much the temperature had dropped. It was quiet, too, and he didn't like that. He wished he was with anybody but Pratt, who he'd never cared for and didn't trust to watch his back. He only trusted him to stab him in that same place. When they finally reached a landing, Frank felt around with his hands and feet. There's no more steps, he said, but he thought he felt a door. Help me kick this fucker in. The combined force of two muscled men managed to push the metal inward after a dozen fierce kicks. The door finally fell off its hinges, falling to the ground with a loud crash. Frank stepped into the completely dark room carefully, not knowing what he would find inside, holding the metal pipe that he now would use as a weapon if he had to. There's got to be a solar panel somewhere, Frank said. He felt along the walls on both sides of the doorway, his right hand touching what he knew was the scanner, which started to beep because his print wasn't an authorized one. Shit! He yelled in frustration. Where's the goddamn light? Suddenly, the room lit up from all directions. Holy shit, Pratt said. We just had to ask, that's all. Frank was so annoyed he spit on the floor. The beeping noise was driving him crazy, and he took the metal bar to it, pulverizing the latest scanning technology with brute force behind his weapon. The beeping stopped as suddenly as it had started. His fury somewhat spent, Frank glanced around the room. White walls, high ceiling, fake wood floor, and one tall slit of a window that was blacked out from the outside. Dirt, he figured. This level was large, but not as spacious as the floor above. Every floor seemed to diminish in size, and he thought that was a really weird way to build a building, since usually you wanted what was below ground to hold up what was above. This room had been some sort of lounge area at one time. There was a couple of bars, lots of tables and chairs, all the comforts of a place to relax. Frank saw another door against the far wall, likely leading to more stairs. They had this place pretty tight, he thought. You couldn't get anywhere easily. Pratt had headed straight to one of the bars and was searching behind it to the sound of breaking glass and a continuous monologue along the lines of, Man, there's got to be some booze here. They couldn't have drunk it all, and we know they didn't take it with them. What an idiot, Frank thought. He glanced behind the other bar just to make sure nobody was hiding back there or under the tables. Frank spied a couple bottles of liquor and found himself wetting his lips. It took an effort to force himself away, but he had a job to do and he wanted to get it over with. Looky here, bro, Pat suddenly yelled from across the room. He held up 4 bottles of booze by the necks, 2 in each hand. Fucking brandy, he screamed, tearing at the seal of one bottle with his teeth to get at the cork. There's nobody here, Frank said. Come on. Hey, let's have a drink first. We got time. Those guys are digging outside. We got the inside covered. Ain't had anything but prison hooch since I've been in this sewer pit. Pratt had the sense to put down 3 of the bottles so he could dig out the cork of one, and now he had that bottle upended to his lips, swallowing down as much as he could, stopping only to breathe. He then took another deep swig, and then he coughed and sputtered liquid into the air, and puked up a bit of the booze and spit it out. And on he went, until Frank wondered if Pratt's fat gut would empty out. Come on, man, help me with this fucking door, Frank called, struggling to get it open by himself. The metal rod worked pretty good getting down to the metal underneath, but he needed Pratt's muscle to back him up in order to open the door completely. Pratt took his time, joining Frank, and only put down the bottle of brandy reluctantly. Together they managed to get the door open, and in the next second Pratt grabbed up his bottle, offering it to Frank, his face full of glee like a kid with a new toy. Frank stared at the bottle of brandy. It had been years since he'd had a real drink. The shit they bootlegged in prison was so vile that he thought he'd lost a taste for real liquor, and he figured his liver was shot by now. As Pratt waved the bottle at him, the rich, woody scent wafted up from the bottle and entered his nostrils like a snake, curling its way to his brain cells that instantly recognized it from all the years he'd boozed and drugged and had gotten himself into such a bad place that he did stupid shit and ended up in this fucking hole on Elysium for a dozen homicides. But the thoughts of his crimes left him fast as that smell brought back other memories. Good times, fine women, nights being high and gambling and partying until he couldn't party anymore. Before he knew it, he grabbed the bottle from Pratt's hands and had himself a good long swallow, the fiery alcohol burning its way down his parched throat. He stopped briefly and looked at the bottle long enough to read the large print on the label, then had another big drink. Pratt laughed, trying to snatch the bottle back from him, and eventually succeeded, but not before Frank had polished off over half of it. Fucker, Pratt said, staring at the bottle. He then took another drink himself. Frank grabbed it back from him, and Pratt said, Okay, there's more. I'll go and get some. Frank still had his wits about him and said, Not now. On the way back. We'll bring it all back up with us. What? For the rest of them pigs? Hell, we're the only ones who knows it's here, Frank said. We can hide what we want for ourselves and take up a couple bottles, and those guys will be grateful that we found anything at all. The idea made its way into Pratt's brain slowly. He tilted the bottle to his lips again, drinking slower this time, staring at Frank as he swallowed. Then he passed the bottle to Frank like they were buddies, and while Frank let the liquid slide down his throat, erasing years in prison and filling his mind with all the good times he'd had and would now have again, Pratt said, Yeah, man, we'll sell it. You and me. We're partners. We'll make a fucking fortune. They hit their fists together, partners in crime, and had another drink each, finishing the bottle to seal their partnership. Okay, Frank said. We gotta go down and get this guy and get him back up to the ground floor. Then you and me, we'll sneak back here and stockpile what's left. Got it, Pat agreed. They headed down the new stairwell. Suddenly, Frank remembered and said, Turn on the lights. And the stairwell came to life with white light. Must be automatic, he told Pratt, who nodded stupidly, licking his lips, not one to know about such things, and was most likely thinking about the bottles of booze awaiting them. The next level down, once they'd broken in, was a repeat performance in terms of walls, ceiling, floor, and window. This room functioned as a dormitory of some kind, full of beds and night tables and little glass refrigerators full of things that had probably been sitting there for the last 20 years since the prison had opened. Pratt was already in there finding food, stuffing his fat face, while Frank headed toward the door on the far wall of the room. They traveled further down, level by level, passing 2 medical laboratories and a room that held weapons of all types. Frank and Pratt spent some time going through the stock, outfitting themselves with assault lasers, pulsar rifles, napalm torches, grenades, laser handguns, everything and anything they could pack onto their bodies that the weight of the weapons would allow in terms of letting them move. As they armed themselves, they decided to hoard this military equipment too. although Frank knew that Pratt would tell Crowley just as he would let Viper know about the munitions. Man, how many more levels are there? Pratt whined. I think we've gone 8, Frank said. According to what Blister found out, there are 9 below, just like above. Fuck, man, Pratt said, looking tuckered out. Frank figured it was all the shit food he piled into his system, clogging his arteries. The booze probably didn't help much either. I can't go many more, Pratt whined again. Just one more, Frank said, although he didn't know that for sure. He just hoped it was so because he was getting pretty sick of this himself. At the bottom of the next stairwell, which was narrower than the others, they reached a door that he hoped would be the last. Damn, man, it's cold. You think we're at the bottom? Pratt asked. Frank didn't answer. He had noticed the temperature lowering as they went down, and now it seemed to be close to freezing, if not below. He, too, wanted to get this over with. Help me kick this fucker in. They put their all into this door, kicking until the fucker fell into the room with a huge crash. Even colder air rushed out to greet them. Lights, Frank said, but this time the lights did not come on. Lights, he demanded. God damn you, bring up the fucking lights. Pratt moved close to him, and his voice trembled a little when he said, I don't like this. Frank felt his own resolve fading, but something in him compelled him to say, We gotta check it out. Hey, anybody in there? He was met with silence. Nah, there's nobody here, Pratt said. Anyways, there are supposed to be 9 levels, and we ain't gone that many. There's gotta be more steps somewhere. You go along the wall that way, I'll go this way, Frank said. Let's see if there's another door. They parted at the doorway, Frank going left, Pratt right, moving along the wall as fast as they could with only the light of the corridor. It was so dark, Frank couldn't see his hand in front of his face. You finding anything? He called out. Nope, nothing, Pratt said, his voice even more laced with what Frank suspected was a little bit of fear. Frank called out again. Anything? The voice coming back to him was almost in his face. Nothing. In a second, they both stepped into the light that came through the doorway and shone on the far wall, bumping into one another. This is it, then, Frank said, and turned toward the doorway. Looks like this is just a small empty room. Nothing in here. Nobody. Yeah, Pratt said, clearly eager to get going. Let's go back up and hide some of the guns and the booze. That sounded like a good idea to Frank. They had both taken only one step when something came between them and the light from the doorway. Something big that blocked most of it. It had a head, and when it raised them, Frank could see arms. What the fuck? Pratt said. Hold on, Frank said, grabbing Pratt's arm to keep him from saying or doing anything stupid. Looks like our lucky day. You, Frank said, using the voice he used in prison to get in the face of anybody who tried to fuck with him. You the guy called Jason? Silence met his demand, and Pratt said, Hey, buddy, we come to let you out of this shithole. Still nothing. The man before them stood not only quietly but immobile, and if he hadn't moved his arms, Frank would have thought he wasn't real. Hey, Frank yelled, upping the ante. We're talking to you. This guy's creeping me out, Pratt said in a loud whisper, annoying Frank. Frank felt the need for action. That was more his style than talking, which was obviously Pratt's thing. He moved quickly toward the Hulk, blocking the light. He got within a couple steps of him when suddenly the guy's arm shot out, as fast as anything he'd ever seen. A hand hard and tight as metal grabbed him by the throat and squeezed. Frank barely noticed that his feet left the floor when Jason lifted him. He only knew that he couldn't get air into his lungs and that the fist clutching him was crushing his windpipe. He flailed, struggling to pull the fingers away. And when that failed and his energy was giving out and the world was going black, he remembered the laser gun jammed into the waistband of his prison suit and pulled it out, aiming it at what he thought was the face of this demon. Jason squeezed even harder, and Frank's aim went far and wide as his vision blurred. The heavy laser fell from his grip, and all he could do was ball his fist and weakly punch at the face of his attacker. Frank's fist hit metal. He didn't feel the pain. He didn't feel much of anything. There was no air coming in or going out. His lungs were about to burst. His head felt like it would explode, but out of the corner of his eye, with fading vision, he saw two things. Pratt the wimp rushing out the door, and Jason's other arm raised high above his head. From the light that shone out of the doorway, Frank could see the arm dropping fast. At the end of it held a huge blade, the biggest Frank had ever seen, and he wasn't surprised to feel it slice him in half at the waist. Pratt ran for his life, huffing and puffing his way up the stairs, taking them 2 and 3 at a time. When he reached the next level up, he slammed the door behind him, knowing it wouldn't hold since they'd broken through it. Sure enough, the door fell down on the ground as soon as Pratt stepped away from it. He raced across the room and was about to go out into the lighted stairway and up another level when suddenly he realized that this was the ammo room and that he was well packed with weapons. Okay, he said to himself, panting, sweating, about to piss his pants, trying to calm himself. Every cell in his body wanted to run up and get out of here, but he knew in his heart he wouldn't make it. He just didn't have the stamina. His head swam, his stomach rolled, and he bent over to vomit out the brandy he had consumed not too long ago. I gotta take a stand here, he gasped, looking around him. He pulled out the flamethrower that he'd slung across his back in front of him. This is the best place. I got all I need here. I'll blow this fucker away, he said. Yeah, come on! Come and get it, motherfucker! But his words sounded weak in his ears. The hands that held the flamethrower trembled. He felt his legs go rubbery beneath him. He couldn't bear the tension of waiting and stalked to the open door, yelling down the stairs. I'm up here, fuckhead! Come and see what I got for you! All his life, Pratt knew he had been a coward. He got through life bullshitting everybody, and he even knew that most of them knew it. But he just never had the courage to fight. Bottom line, he was too afraid. But now he knew he had to do something. The only way he'd get out of here alive was to take this guy out. Right here, right now. While he was thinking all this, he heard a sound below him, like something hitting the wall or the ground hard. Frank, you there? He yelled. Maybe this wasn't a good idea, waiting here like this. Sure, there was ammo, but he had plenty on him. He could maybe fight better from up higher. The rooms were bigger, and he wouldn't feel so claustrophobic. Yeah, waiting here was really stupid. He turned and ran to the door leading up. It wasn't easy, hauling himself up 100 steps, and his legs were giving out halfway. It's the goddamn weapons, he thought. He had too much ammo on him. What kind of stupid fucker packed himself with so much firepower? One laser, one flamer, that's all he needed. That's enough to take down any fucker. Pratt quickly discarded everything else, letting the weapons drop the stairs behind him. Yeah, he yelled, moving easier. When he got to the next level, a lab, he felt winded, but told himself that that was natural, and he was lighter and almost there. Just 6 more to go, he told himself. He struggled up the next 2 levels, past the dorms and the other lab. By the time he got to the lounge, his body was dripping with sweat, and he had discarded his clothing and the laser gun, leaving him with just the shoes on his feet and the flamethrower clutched in one hand. It was heavier than the laser, but he was old school and liked a heavy weapon. Heavy equaled dangerous in his brain. Lasers were for sissies, like Frank. Frank, what the fuck happened to him? Pratt didn't know and didn't want to know. Last he remembered, the fucker Jason had lifted Frank up into the air by his neck, and Pratt figured it was time to get the hell out of there. Sweat dripped into his eyes. You're almost there, he gasped, barely able to catch his breath, reminding himself as he entered the lounge that he was just 1 floor away from his buddies. He looked around, his eyes focusing on the bar. It was like he'd reached heaven. Fuck, I'm thirsty, he said, knowing he didn't have much time, but staggering to the bar nonetheless, where he'd left a couple bottles. He didn't have the patience to tear out the paper and get the cork out of the bottles, so he just bashed the nub at the top of the neck against the bar, like he'd done as a kid, and poured the hot liquid down his throat like there was no tomorrow. He coughed and sputtered from the burning brew, but drank more, his head swimming, his body about to pull at his feet. Okay, I'm out of here, he gasped again, his voice only a whisper. And he took one final swig. Just 1 more, he said, thinking about the levels, knowing he was 1 from the top. Though 1 more had to do with the bottle, too, and although every instinct told him to stop swilling and get the fuck out of there, Pratt found himself lifting the bottom of the bottle to the sky and finishing the sweet brandy off. The booze helped calm his nerves, and when he heard a sound and turned and saw Jason's head as he reached the top of the stairs from below, Pratt's courage was renewed, and he figured he could take him. Until, that is, Jason stepped into the room. Pratt's automatic response was to raise the flamethrower, but his finger hesitated on the trigger just as Jason stepped inside the doorway. Pratt had never seen anyone like this before, and he'd seen some pretty bad motherfuckers in his life. "Hold it right there," he said, lifting the flamethrower to shoulder height. "I'm taking you to the top, so you just move on over to that doorway ahead of me and we'll go. We'll go up and you'll meet the guys and see what's what." His voice sounded weak and scared to his own ears, but there was nothing he could do about it. More than anything, he wanted another drink. But even though there were 2 more bottles right on top of the bar, he didn't dare lower the flamethrower to reach for one. Pratt then thought that he could perhaps soften Jason with a drink or two, making it easier to persuade him up the stairs. He moved the flamethrower down to chest height, and not taking his eyes off of Jason, reached a hand out to try to grab one of the bottles sitting on the bar. The back of his hand hit the bottle, and too late, he quickly turned his head and watched as it crashed to the floor. "Damn! Fuck!" Pratt spat out, and when he looked back up, he was shocked to see Jason striding across the large room toward him. "Stay back!" he yelled. Pratt hesitated. He was supposed to bring this guy up alive. "Fuck!" he screamed, and disengaged the lock on the trigger before pulling it. A line of bright yellow and blue flames shot into the air before him, hitting Jason in his chest. The metallic breastplate he wore heated to red. Jason staggered back a few steps, his huge arms dangling at his sides, one holding a huge knife. Something in Pratt registered that the blade was bloody, and Frank's face flashed in his mind for a split second. But he couldn't worry about that now. The thrower was an older model, one he was familiar with. It was designed to shoot flames for 5 seconds and then automatically turn off for 10. You had to pull the trigger for another round. He guessed that this particular model, if it was full of fuel, might have 6 rounds in it. Pratt was no fool. He backed up toward the doorway to the stairs leading to the top floor. As he did so, Jason started toward him, the breastplate cooling back to its natural color. Pratt pulled the trigger and nothing happened. He waited and then tried again. Another blast of fire shot out of the weapon, hitting Jason at about crotch level. Again, the monster stumbled backwards. All the while, Pratt backed up to the stairs. When the fire died, Pratt turned and ran, reaching the bottom step before he figured he'd better turn and blast the sucker again. He pulled the trigger again and again. Nothing happened. Or rather, something did happen, but not what he wanted to happen. Jason was heading toward him at a furious pace, and had considerably bridged the gap between them. Pratt did not want to be trapped in the stairwell. He knew he couldn't get up fast enough to escape. He just needed this damn machine to send another blast out to give him some time. Finally, the damn gun shot out flames, and Pratt noticed right off that it was a weaker jet than before. During the 5 seconds that the flames spurted out, he backed up the steps, and Jason moved forward. Even before the fire died, Pratt turned and ran. He got up about 7 steps before he felt himself being caught by his hair and hauled backwards. He was yanked so hard that his neck could have broken, and he realized a few seconds later just how unfortunate it was that it had not. He still had the flamethrower in his hand, so he frantically pulled the trigger, but there was no fire coming to his rescue. Jason hauled him down the steps and back into the lounge. He dragged Pratt across the floor like they were in the Stone Age, and Pratt was the bitch being hauled back to the cave to get fucked, something Pratt had been plenty of in jail. "Fuck!" he screamed, hoping to hell that someone would hear him and come down to help. He started to babble in abject fear. "Listen, man, listen, there's booze here. We can go halvesies, 60-40, your favor. I got the contacts. We'll make a killing. You need me, bro. You need me." It was only when they'd reached the center of the room that Jason stopped, dropping Pratt onto the floor as if he were a dirty shirt or something. Pratt looked up at him, staring into eyes so soulless, glowing red like death, eyes that said, "Nothing lives here." And while Pratt focused on the eyes, part of him watched the massive arm lift, and that knife, where the fuck did he get such a big fucking knife, rise over his head. A knife blade so red, the red dripping, spattering onto Pratt's face as it came down fast and split Pratt's body from skull to crotch in two. Pratt saw blood spurt into the air, then felt pain. Then there was no more face, no more sound, no more Pratt. Jason looked from the doorway of the steps, going down to the doorway of the steps, leading up, back and forth, until he heard a noise. Then, by instinct, he turned toward one of those doorways. Several of the men were already returning with portable speed diggers they'd found that ran off microwaves. They started in right away, Viper directing them to the side of the military complex where the windows were lined up from the top floor to the main floor. The current bottom, figuring the below-ground floors, likely continued the straight line. Jason had been seen in the window before. He figured it might be easier to find him that way now. "Okay, guys, we're down at the bottom," Crowley said from the pit, where almost all the guys were. Viper and a couple others had stayed at the top. Crowley had pretty much taken over as boss of this project. Viper didn't mind letting him do the organizing for the Joe jobs. Viper wasn't interested in being a foreman, lording it over the laborers. He wanted the crown, where he would lord over everybody, including Crowley. Under Crowley's direction, the men dug further, creating a trench along one wall which had a long vertical window that became more exposed as the soil was removed. "Damn, never thought we'd get down here," somebody said. "Fuck if I'm not tired. Who's got some water?" The 50 or so men doing the digging were just about at the end of their tether, even though they'd taken shifts, so Viper was pretty glad they'd reached their goal because he sure didn't want to be here much longer. "Crack that window," he ordered before Crowley could get a command in. Two of the guys who had shovels began bashing the spade end against the glass. Viper knew it was the type of window that wasn't supposed to shatter, but this one had, somehow, and it looked like it had done so from the inside. A web of fine lines ran through the window, and it didn't take the guys long to start prying out chunks. Once the hole was big enough for a smallish man to climb through, they sent Tiny, the littlest guy in the prison, who only came up to about Viper's chest. He got through, carrying a low-level solar light, and ran into the room. Crowley called into the darkness that swallowed Tiny. "Find him?" "Not yet, boss," Tiny said, and the boss part rankled Viper. He was losing control, and he hadn't even gained it yet. They waited for a bit before Tiny yelled, "It's too fucking dark. I can't see anything." Finally, Crowley sent in another guy, who didn't fit as easily through the opening. Another 5 minutes went by, and Tiny appeared in the broken window. "Nothing in here, and nobody either," Tiny said. "What?" Viper yelled from up above. Crowley looked up and around, giving Viper a murderous look, one that said if he'd been had, Viper shouldn't expect to make it to the next morning. "He's in there," Viper said, with more confidence in his voice than he felt. "Well, we can't see nothing, right, Tiny?" "Yeah, just where the light comes in from the hallway. Get us a light, will ya?" Tiny said. The second guy came to the window, too, and somebody tossed down a solar light box, which was handed in to Tiny, who flipped it on and turned. "Holy shit!" he cried out. "What?" Crowley asked. "What the fuck are you looking at?" He bent his head to peer into the window. Then he said, "Damn!" Instantly, he pulled his face out and turned to the men who fell silent, including Viper. Finally, Viper got it together and said, "Well, what the fuck is it?" Crowley, for once, couldn't speak. One of his guys asked, "Boss, what's in there?" "Looks like Frank's in there." "Yeah, and?" Viper asked. Crowley stared up at him with stunned eyes. "I think he's dead. Not just dead, but it's like there's two of him now." "What the fuck you talking about?" Viper said, feeling a chill run up his spine. Somebody cut him in two." That ain't possible," Viper said. He went down with Pratt, and Pratt ain't that strong, Tiny said in a frightened voice. There's some other stuff in the room, you know, like a guy might have been living down here. Maybe he went up through the building trying to get out, Viper said. Then how come Frank's dead and Pratt ain't brought him to us? Crowley said, his voice hard, his eyes focused up on Viper. Maybe they're on their way. Hey, Tiny, see if you can get upstairs from there, Viper called down to him. Tiny, his head still poking out the window, said, Yeah, there's a door and some steps. You want me? You think I should go up? Yeah, both Viper and Crowley said at the same time. The two glared at each other, and Viper felt dozens of pairs of eyes from tired men in the pit, below them, also staring at him. Crowley assumed command again. Tiny, you wait there. Send the other guy up. Look, they're coming up through the building, Viper said like he knew for sure, making his voice stay steady and commanding. That's what's happening. Pratt's bringing Jason up here. I'm going to go meet them and bring this Jason guy out here. Yeah, and if he's not there, Crowley said, how do we know he even exists? Because JJ knows about it. You can ask him yourself. Look, we're wasting time. Tiny, you go on up, and I'm coming through the main entrance and coming down. When we meet, we'll find him, and we'll bring him out. You guys can wait here, he said to the others. But Viper had no intention of going inside the military complex. He had a bad feeling about this, and he didn't want to be around if Jason had left the building. As he headed away from the top of the mound, he heard Crowley speak. Tiny, stay put. Fuck. Viper had already lost these guys. How the fuck did that happen? The first thing he'd have to do was have Jason take out Crowley. That would be the only way he could be in charge. Once he'd make his way around to the entrance, he found only a couple of the stragglers there, and he sent them to join the others. Part of him thought he'd see Pratt, but he was nowhere within sight. He knew that if he was going to get out of this alive and not be beaten to a pulp by 100 angry, tired, sweaty cons who were in a foul mood, he had to get the fuck out of there right now. Viper looked inside the entrance, which was empty, and when he thought that there was nobody around outside, he headed for the dirt road. He trotted along it, checking over his shoulder from time to time. All the way back to the camp, he thought about how jammed up he was, thanks to Blister. Blister. He couldn't get his hands around her throat fast enough. Crowley stood with his fist on his hips, royally pissed off. Viper, as usual, proved to be a fanatical fuck-up. But Crowley was also pissed at himself. He'd leapt into this without knowing all the facts, and Crowley didn't give a flying fuck about facts. What enraged him was that Viper had, this time, sucked him in. How in the hell did he get blindsided like this? His guys would think he was some kind of royal ass, a real fucking fool. It was hard enough to keep control of these deadheads without falling into stupid schemes dreamed up by scum like Viper. A loser if ever there was one. Crowley wasn't about to forgive or forget. He was about to crawl out of the fucking pit, find Viper, and use him as an asswipe. Hey, get me out! Help me out of here! Crowley turned to see Tiny at the window, trying to jam his legs and arms through at the same time, his face a mask of terror. A couple of the guys nearby were laughing their heads off at him. Finally, he got through and fell into the gully they'd dug. Now that he was out, Crowley could see that his shirt and pants had been ripped and torn, and he was covered in blood. What'd you do? Crowley asked. Cut yourself, and where's the other guy sent in there? Don't know, don't care, Tiny panted, out of breath as if he'd been running, already on his feet, trying to claw his way up the mound of dirt that stretched 9 levels. The guy was a wreck, shaking like a girl just about crying. Hey, you guys up there, toss me a rope or something. What the fuck's the matter with you? You think you can get up from here? Go through the building, Crowley said. I ain't going back in there, Tiny said. What the fuck? Somebody snapped. What'd you see? It's Frank. Yeah, and I told you he's dead, cut in 2, Crowley snapped. Yeah, you did, but that ain't all of him. What's that supposed to mean? Crowley asked. Most of the guys in the ditch had gathered around a jittery Tiny as he told them what he saw. "There's blood everywhere, covering everything. When we got the light, we could see. And there was body parts, like a guy's been cut in pieces. We didn't know what to make of it. And then the other guy, he knows Frank pretty good and says that's his hand, 'cause of the ring he always wears. Then I see Frank's face lying under this table. Just his face, like it's been ripped off the front of his head or something." "Holy shit," Crowley said. "Whoever did this," Tiny said, "he ain't no normal guy. He's got some kind of... He's a devil. He's possessed. Man, I'm getting out of here. Throw down that damned rope." Tiny started to crawl up the mound again, but the other guys down there with him were pushing and shoving and struggling to get out themselves, and it was impossible from such a depth. Tools and fabric dangled down from the few guys at the top to help, and guys boosted other guys, making a human ladder that went up rather high. A couple of guys from above held the legs of other guys who were dangling down the pit and were able to reach Tiny, who was at the top of the human ladder, for 1 second, before the whole fleshy chain collapsed. Tiny hit the ground with a thud. He ran into the waiting crowd of a dozen men, flapping his arms like a beheaded chicken, and the group parted like a sea opening to let Moses through. It was as if they all thought that Tiny could lead them away from the strange situation they'd found themselves in. The men who remained at the bottom, surrounding Crowley, were tense as they saw Tiny finally get to the top. Then the guys at the top disappeared, and words quickly spread that they're getting out of there. Many of the guys at the bottom of the pit then tried to climb up the dirt mountain, clawing with their hands, which was worse than useless. Going through the inside of the building to get back up had been the original plan, and it made more sense than trying to get all these guys back up the dirt mound. But Crowley didn't have the heart to try to stop them. Something was really wrong about all of this. Real wrong. He felt it intuitively. He'd spent a long time in the joint here, and on Earth too before that. And the air always felt weird and electric before the shit hit the fan. Crowley turned and headed inside the narrow window, barely fitting his bulky body through, packed as if it was with muscles that had been worked on over the years. Once he got inside, Crowley realized that a few other guys had joined him, at least a dozen. They all stopped as one unit, stunned by the blood everywhere, the walls, the floor, even splattered on the high ceiling. And just like Tiny said, there was half a torso here and the other half there, and the face of Frank under the table like a mask. But it was his face, that was for sure. Whoever had done this was pretty goddamn sick and pretty goddamn strong. "Fuck, man, this ain't right," one guy said, and the others agreed. More men from outside crawled in through the window, knowing this was their only way out. No kidding, Crowley thought, but didn't say anything. The men, close to 60 of them, were getting out of hand, jammed into this small, stinking room, and he had to control them. They'd go up through the building, try to hook up with this Jason dude, and then hunt down Viper and string up his ass. "We're going up," he said. "You guys wait here," he said to 2 of them. "I want to make sure nobody goes in or out by that window. The rest of you assholes follow me." They started up, and the first floor they hit was pay dirt. Weapons. Everything from military to civilian and back again. Big mothers that took a couple guys to load and shoot. Flamethrowers and lasers for the individual killer. "Hey," one of the guys shouted, "I used to have this baby when I was a kid." He held up a kind of spear-throwing projectile missile, and one of the cons laughed. Yeah, Billy, we all had him in the nursery." Most of the guys laughed, and that was good, Crowley figured. He had the feeling that humor would be in short supply soon. Whoever had covered the lower floor with blood was somebody they'd had to watch out for. "Okay, load yourselves up so we can get to the surface." They grabbed just about everything they could wear or carry in their hands, and still there was a veritable arsenal left over, as if whoever had stocked it had expected an invading army. The next 2 levels up were laboratories. Most of the equipment looked damaged, smashed on the floor, partitions and monitors broken, connectors ripped out and flung every which way, like some madman had been through there. A few more levels and they hit a lounge. Guys ran in all directions, pulling bottles out from behind bars and cupboards over the bars, yelling and screaming like they were at a party. Crowley wouldn't have minded, but for the blood. and the butchered body that he recognized as Pratt. Fuck, the guy was cut to ribbons. When they first entered the lounge and saw it, several seconds of eerie quiet settled over all of them. They were spooked. Crowley was pretty wildly spooked himself. Now, those guys were going nuts. "We got another 2 floors, Danny said to him. "Yeah, we'll let these bozos have a few belts, then we head up. I want to find this Jason, if he exists, and I sure as hell want to find Viper." Danny grinned, the gaping hole from a tooth he'd lost in a fight, a constant reminder that these guys were nothing if they weren't wild cards. Booze would loosen them up, but it would also make them crazy. Crowley didn't mind either one or both. He wanted their loose, crazy energy available. Whoever or whatever responsible for all this blood and these body parts needed taken out. And to do that, his guys had to be half-loaded. Crowley headed for one of the bars and snagged himself a bottle of Jack Daniels. The whiskey scorched his throat, but it was a good fire, one he'd missed. He drank like a madman, parched, until he had downed half the bottle, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Okay, guys, we're heading up," he called, turning to the door. Standing in the doorway was one big motherfucker. The guy was a giant, mostly covered in metal, if the shape of the metal was any indication of the muscles underneath. Fuck. The men slowly became quiet as they turned, sizing up the intruder, mainly to assess if they could take him out. Crowley glanced around him, and from the looks on the guys' faces, he gauged that no one thought they could. He slammed his bottle into the bar to get the big guy's attention. Hell, to get the attention of all of them. This would be his show. He wanted to make sure it went his way. "You the fucker made this mess?" he asked, his tone as threatening as he could make it. And there wasn't a guy in the room that didn't tremble a little. Crowley knew he was capable of anything, and so did everybody else. When the guy didn't answer, Crowley lifted the assault laser he had snagged down below, loaded with 10 clips. Each clip held one atomic pellet that would lodge inside whoever it struck, burst open and clean out those insides like a nuclear explosion limited to one. Every guy in the room raised one of the weapons he had snatched at the same time, so it became a face-off, roughly 50-1. The asshole in the doorway didn't have any weapons on him, but he didn't even flinch. "Get your ass in here, motherfucker!" Still no response. Then suddenly this Jason guy stomped into the room. Crowley and everybody else saw the big knife or whatever it was in his hand, and some of the guys laughed. Firepower. That's where it was at, not old-fashioned metal. At least this guy had the sense to know that, and was obeying Crowley. Jason kept moving directly toward Crowley, who said, "That's far enough," but the guy kept coming. "Stop or you're a dead fucker, goddammit!" Jason kept coming. Crowley pulled the trigger and blasted him with one round that hit the metal chest plate and bounced off. The atom bullets were not as hard as other bullets because they had to be eroded from within the shell. That was one of their drawbacks. But once they lodged inside a victim, they were 100 times as powerful as anything else. The bullet bounced onto the floor. It started to glow red. "Fuck!" somebody yelled, and the guys began to scatter, some running to the stairs that went down, others running to the ones that headed up. Crowley would have run too, but when he turned, Jason had him. The big fucker swung that knife like a crazy man, the blade hacking at guys as they raced past, lopping off heads, arms, cutting through the middle, down the middle, up from the middle, crossways and catty corner. Blood began spurting through the air in all directions, and the room filled with the sound of guys screaming. Crowley's back was to Jason because he turned to run back to the stairs going down. But that massive paw had caught him by the seat of his pants and hauled him backwards. He struggled to get another weapon out, one that would fire fast and repeatedly, not like the goddamn atom assault laser that needed too much time to reload, and which he dropped to the floor as useless. His movements got his arm chopped off at the elbow. Blood gushed out of him as he struggled to get away, and he clamped his other hand over the wound. But the iron grip the guy had on him couldn't be loosened. Crowley let go of his wounded elbow so he could pull out a small handheld laser with his left hand. His only hand. But he couldn't get turned around enough to fire, so he shot under his severed arm. His body twisted at the last second, and he hit his own armpit, sending a blast of searing laser from his underarm to his back, and he screamed. Most of the guys had scattered, and the three who remained to help him suddenly ran for their lives. Jason caught them, sticking them through the chest, the groin, the eyeball, everywhere he could stick them with that impossibly sharp, quadruple-sized knife. Despite the excruciating pain, Crowley tried again, with the shaking hand, to shoot the laser behind him, but the beam went wild around the room. Danny, still standing, his eyes wild with fear, fired a direct hit at Jason at above face level. Surely some of that firepower would hit the eyes behind the mask, Crowley thought. It should stop the bastard. It should lessen his grip. And it did. For about 2 seconds. It was enough time for Crowley to spin himself around to face this demon. As he spun, he pointed the laser at where he hoped the eyes would be, and was immediately mesmerized by the sight of something very strange. It was like there was some kind of mechanism inside Jason that was repairing the damage to his eye, even as Crowley watched. But he didn't watch for long. He pointed to fire. The blade, as if by instinct, chopped off his other arm. With his finger on the trigger, the laser beam flashed around the room as it fell to the ground. Out of the corner of his eye, Crowley watched Danny flee down the stairs. And now Crowley was alone with Jason, and the atom bullet that was already seeping material that would blow this place sky high, because it was on a floor and not inside somebody's body. When Crowley turned his head back up, Jason was staring at him, his eyes pure evil and full of hate. Crowley was bleeding out at both arms, and suddenly Jason dropped him onto the floor on top of the fucking atom bullet, and stood for another moment as if watching the vitae gush from Crowley's arms. It was like he was waiting to see what would happen next. Crowley was weak, but he knew he had to get off that bullet. He tried to move himself with the short stumps that remained of his arms, and then tried to dig the toes of his boots into the floor to shove himself away and turn himself over, but he didn't have the strength. And the pain became his entire focus. But for one thought, move off the damned bullet. Suddenly, he was alone in the room. Even Jason was gone. He heard screams, though, and knew the mother of all killers had gone up or down and had found some of Crowley's guys and was taking them out in the most gruesome ways. But Crowley had his own problems. The bullet was moving toward his flesh and blood, what it had been built to do. This was why it was such a desirable weapon, limited though it was in other ways. If it got near your body, it would enter like an iron filing drawn into a fleshy magnet, and Crowley could feel it inside his chest already. His body trembled in terror. The atomic stew burned its way through him, and he would soon become a little nuclear explosion of one. Suddenly the burning intensified. He ignited from within, like a spontaneous combustion, as his body burst into a zillion pieces. He stupidly could only think about the walls of this lounge. What a paint job. Jason stomped down into the bowels of the military complex. He overtook the men he found as if they were ants, crushing them underfoot, pounding the life out of them with his fists. His machete arm flailed in every direction, and he cut to bits all in his path. Blood sprayed and gushed and spattered and coated everything. Body parts flew into the air, or crunched under his feet, making the floor slippery for the men still running away, but not for Jason. Methodically, he went through each room, taking the men as he came to them. Whether or not they resisted mattered not at all to him. As the rooms became smaller and the men had nowhere to hide, they pleaded and charged and ran like crazy, and did all the things they usually did when he raised his machete. His vision, coated in red, blinded him to all but the necessity of stopping everything that stepped into his path. Finally, he reached the place that had been his home for so long, that had kept him imprisoned. It was empty of living beings, just the dead now. He crashed through the window to get to the pathetic insects struggling to climb up the hill of dirt and avoid his machete, but they could not. He sliced and stabbed and cut one after the other, filling the mound with bodies and parts, soaking the soil in blood. And when all of them were gone, he stopped a moment to listen at the window. He heard nothing up through the building, no one, but he could hear them up above at ground level. Stepping on the slippery bodies, he climbed the mound of them as if they were a fleshy ladder. And then he used the building wall, creating a ladder as his fingers pushed through technology's most advanced materials, making finger and toe holds. He hauled himself up until he was high enough, and then he leapt to the surface. Men ran, screaming in all directions, some yelling, "We gotta stick together!" Another said, "Fuck that!" Jason went after them. Those who had followed the advice of the first, he found together, and used the blade to bind them in twos and threes to the earth, cutting off 2 or 3 heads at once, and slicing several bodies at the middle, until they were all dead. Then he went after the others one by one. The first he sliced from behind, up the middle, parting him in two. His machete hit the back of the head of the next guy, going through the skull and then lopping it away from the body horizontally, until the guy toppled forward and stopped moving. The third victim fell forward as Jason hit him on the legs. The screaming never bothered him. In fact, it made no impression. Nothing did. He would not stop until he had killed every last one of them, until the last breath of life was gone, gone, gone. That was his goal. His only goal. And he hacked and sliced and diced all living, breathing beings in his path, sensing them by instinct, until the ground was red, the air putrid, and the bodies lay rotting about him. And then he headed down the dirt path to follow the scent of those that were still living. Okay, guys, this has been chapters 10 and 11 of Jason X to the Third Power. I promised you guys a long upload that had a ton of action in it, a lot of Jason doing his thing, and I believe I delivered on that. And I believe the book is finally paying off. Sure, we spent over half the book with character development and little things and hints at Jason and little glimpses of Jason, but now that Jason is unleashed, I think the next 100 or so pages that are left are going to be a bloodbath. And I want to know what you guys thought of tonight's 2 chapters. I really enjoyed reading them, and I can't wait to find out what happens next. That's my opinion anyways. I will tell you this, and correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but does this book have more characters than any of the other 18 books I've done? Because I swear, I almost forgot who I was, because I had to change my voice so many times for so many different characters, especially in Chapter 10. That was ridiculous. I mean, everybody was getting their 2 cents in, like 12 different characters. So yeah, that was hardcore. But guys, I really want to know what you thought of tonight's upload. I really want to know what you thought of Jason's mass murder scene here. Man, he went through, what did they say, 50, 60 people? And it was like it was nothing. Are you excited about what's coming next in this book? Have you enjoyed the book so far? Do you think Jason's premiere tonight as a killing machine was worth the weight of all the character development that we went through? I don't feel like the first 200, 300 pages were filler, because it kept me entertained. I was interested in Major Tom. You know, I was interested in these prisoners whenever they came about, and the storylines of Sky. You know, and I'll be doing Jason X Death Moon later on down the line. It came before this book, but I'm going to read it as kind of a prequel to this novel, To the Third Power, where all these little questions we might have about some of the characters, we'll get all those answers whenever I do Death Moon as a prequel to this one. So yeah, I want to hear from you guys in the comments section, and I will talk to you there. And I'll be back very soon with more of Jason X to the Third Power. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and don't fuck with Jason. Have a great night, everyone.